going to sing a song that we wrote about, yes. It's called Bridge of Yes, and we're going to sing it a couple of times now and then a little bit closer to the start so that we can share it with everyone before it arrives. So it gives us a rehearsal and it gives us a performance. And this is Bianca Levi, who's going to be joining me with a few songs.
First stolen land, then stolen families, and stolen words, still finding a way to get them back. But we can see it coming, like a rising tide, an ocean churning ever since the boats arrived. And now it's flooding the shores to hear the great divide. The voices, oh our voices, say it's time. My heart, your heart, our heart. It's time to make a start. My heart, your heart, our heart, our heart. Yes, is a bridge, a gift to all of us, a way to start to reconcile our troubled past. Turn our backs on ignorance and close the doors on fear and try to own the truth for what it is. My heart, your heart, our heart. It's time to make a start. My heart, your heart, our heart, our heart. First Nations voices, ancient sovereignty shine through us, calling for change. We know it in our hearts and heads, the way to cross the bridge of yes. So why not now? Why not now? My heart, your heart, our heart. One step to make a start. My heart, your heart, our heart, our heart.
Thank you, Jen.
Bianca Levi, everybody. Thank you. We're gonna sing that again when the room's full as well, just so we get another chance to sing it together. But also, that was probably our second rehearsal. I'd like to sing a Ghana acknowledgement with you. And it's an echo song, so you get to join in. How about that? Would you like to? It's in Ghana language. It's Ghana Miana, Ghana people. Nadalu, we collectively. Ghana Yata, land, Ghana land. Tempinthi, recognise and acknowledge, understand. And Natalia, respect. We sing it at kindy every morning.
Natalia, Natalia. Natalia, Natalia, Natalia.
Thank you. Those words were given to us by Uncle Tamaru, and the children at Eden Hills Kindergarten wrote the melody for that song. We've just recently written a new Ghana acknowledgement song, actually, with the brand new children that have just had come in on our mid-year intake, and with a view to talking about Ghana and letting it be a leaping off point for our songwriting together. We ended up writing a new acknowledgement as well, which is in English, and it's in their words. And it's another echo song, so you can get to join in. Bianca, do you want to jump up and sing the echo bit? It makes sense. I should have got you to do that last time. Still so new. Yeah. Okay. Actually, will I do it like that? Okay. I think I'm going to do it here. Okay, change key. Because we sing it at kindy really, really high, and it's for their voices, but I think it'd be nice if we lowered it down a little bit. What do you think?
Yeah, cool.
Okay. Here we go. I love the mountains.
I love the mountains.
I love the sea.
I love the sea.
I love spaceships and birds.
I love spaceships and birds.
And I love songs.
And I love songs.
It's about Ghana people.
It's about Ghana people
Who share their lands with us.
who share their lands with us.
The sky is very blue.
The sky is very blue.
I love the trees' leaves.
I love the trees' leaves.
Write them a letter
Write them a letter
to say thank you,
to say thank you.
and put a love heart on it,
Put a love heart on it.
and give it to them. Give it to them. It's about Ghana people
It's about Ghana people
who share their lands with us.
who share their lands with us.
The sky is very blue.
The sky is very blue.
I love the trees' leaves.
I love the trees' leaves.
Well done, everybody. Thanks, Bianca. You might as well stay and we'll sing it again. What do you think? Do you want to stay up and we'll sing it again?
That one? Yeah.
Cool. What do you reckon, since we're here? All right. So, why don't we sing the song that we've been practicing today? I think the song was finished on Thursday night, and Bianca suggested some little tweaks to the lyrics, which was really helpful. Just
4 words.
yeah, it's awesome though. Very, very important. And we had a little practice today at the Kindy Arts Show, and we're going to sing it for you, if I can. And apologies about my buzzy guitar; it's a bit off-putting, but anyway, needs a service, don't we all? All right. It's called The Bridge of Yes. I heard a really wonderful talk by Noel Pearson, and I got all inspired. And I thought this was a response to some of the things he said.
First stolen lands, then stolen families, and stolen words, still finding a way to get them back. But we can see it coming, like a rising tide, an ocean churning ever since the boats arrived. And now it's flooding the shores to heal the great divide. The voices, oh our voices say it's time. My heart, your heart, our heart. It's time to make a start. My heart, your heart, our heart, our heart. Yes, there's a bridge, a gift to all of us, a way to start to reconcile our troubled past. Turn our backs on ignorance, close the doors on fears, and try to own the truth for what it is. My heart, your heart, our heart. It's time to make a start. My heart, your heart, our heart, our heart, heart.
Do you think you can join in on the last one?
First Nations voices, ancient sovereignty shine through us, calling, calling for change. We know it in our hearts and heads, the way to cross the bridge of yes. So why not now? Why not now? My heart, your heart, our heart. One step to make a start. My heart, your heart, our heart, our heart,
Celebrating the Uluru Statement of the Heart. Thank you, Bianca Levi, young Kinjara woman, amazing artist. Thanks very much.
Thank you for asking me to join.
Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did, according to the reckoning of our culture, from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago. This sovereignty is a spiritual notion. The ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom, remain attached thereto, and must one day return hither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. How could it be otherwise, that peoples possess the land for 60 millennia and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years? With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood. Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are aliened from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them, and our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness. We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country. We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in the movement of the Australian people for a better future.
My name is Peter Cranwell and I'm a member of this church, Blackwood Uniting Church, and I welcome you on their behalf. This is a safe place. Let us respect each person as we come to seek to be informed. To begin, I'd like to introduce Jakira Telfer to share a greeting to Spirit of Place.
Ngaitli, Ninkamurni Kumakembrani, Taulamini Yarta, Namani Nanyari, Jikurawari, Malawar Tarkatinyai, Ninkamurni Nyadlayarta, Bukiana Menawanda Dinyai, Tarkati, Kuru Tanjananga. What I just said is speaking in the mother tongue and the Malawiramina Wara, which is the dialect that I come from, which is the Dry Forest Clan of the Gunner people of the Adelaide region. And I just paid homage and respect as a carrier of the language, because that's what us women are, you know, from growing up, and even speaking in the tummy, the women are the first carrier of the voice for the young people. So just acknowledging that the language still lives through me while I'm here, but my cultural responsibility is to carry that on for the next generation. I also acknowledged the circle and this space that we're in today, and acknowledging the Mayoki Mianayarta, which is the travelling song on the wind. Just recently, we transitioned from Kudlila to Wiltari, which is the changing of the season for us. There's 6 seasons for us and 4 for Australia. But the traditional way, there is 6, and I think it makes sense that we're transitioning into spring, which is Wiltari, and that Wiltari is that eagle's foot up in the sky, which is the Southern Cross for everyone else. But when that Southern Cross changes in the sky, it tells us that in the sky country, the sea country, and the land country, they're all related. It's telling us that you look up there and you look down here, and it's time for new change, a new beginning, and life is forming. So I think it makes sense that this voice in this referendum is falling in the season of new beginnings. So I think that's just how I personally relate my cultural knowledge to this voice, and I'm very grateful to be here and to greet you to the spirit of this place, which I think is more important, learning the history and the knowledge of a place like this, and to be able to come and be a part of a circle now created with everybody here, because circles is where our people come from. So I'll leave you with one word, nakara, which means until our paths meet again, like that circle. And my name also means returning full moon as well. So it's like that moon cycle, always returning. So I'd just like to also share, I've got these circles on me as well, and across my face, which is the river. And for me and my culture, the women represent the rock and the water. And I think we all know a woman that's a rock in our family. So yeah, I just want to share a little bit oak and leave that there today. But I say, nakara for now, and I greet you to the spirit of this place. Ma.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Moogie Sumner. I'm sorry I can't be there with you today. I'm at a conference in Canada, Healing Our Spirit Worldwide conference, and I'm here talking about other issues, but you've got a good situation there that you need to talk about. You need to talk about the voice. You need to talk about how you're going to use your voice to help our voice. You're going to use that so that we can talk about things that affect us. We've got a vote and a voice to talk about issues that affect us. So I'd like to thank you all for being here today. I'm sorry I can't be there. So please, use your voice to help our voice. Thank you very much. And I will see you all when I get back. Thank you.
Thanks, Jakira, for that welcome, and may our paths cross again for sure. I'd like to also acknowledge the Kaurna people, their elders, past, present and emerging, and especially for their incredible stewardship of this land that we are on. Now, Catherine, you're our local member, so welcome. We acknowledge that you are here. I can see Heather, so Heather, our local mayor. Thank you to both of you for attending. We're thankful for that. I'd like to thank Jenny and Bianca for their music to begin tonight. And, oh, that's feedback. I'm not sure if it's coming from these. No. But especially for that new song which they wrote. She's probably already said it, but this is about the second time she's sung it. So I got an email from her last night saying, I've just finished this song. So you've witnessed something pretty special, I think. As you know, the registration process for tonight gave you all the ability to register your questions. Thanks for doing that. That's been terrific, and there have been some key themes that have come out of that, and they will be addressed by the panel, which will be the main part of this evening. I'd now like to introduce to you Senator Sarah Hanson Young. Sarah is the Green Senator for South Australia. She's a local, she's a passionate environmentalist, she's a community campaigner and a human rights activist. With 16 years in Parliament, Sarah has become one of the country's leading voices on women in politics, environmental protection, climate change, media laws and diversity, and human rights policy. Sarah is also a passionate advocate in support of yes in the upcoming referendum. Welcome, Sarah.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Thanks, Peter. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. Wonderful to have our local state member, Catherine Hutchinson, here, and our local mayor, Heather Holmes-Ross. Wonderful to see you all here. It is wonderful to be here for me because, as Peter says, this is my local community as well, and it's always so nice to be able to come and speak with you and see you at times when I'm not stuck in Canberra. And I can tell you, it's a much nicer spot to be on a Saturday afternoon than in the halls of Parliament. Today's community forum is about listening, it's about learning and finding out how we can speak about this yes referendum to our friends and our families. And when I will say that, I want to acknowledge that I know not everybody in the room is a yes voter or has decided which way at this point they will vote. But many of you are, and many of you would like to know how to speak to your friends and family about this issue. We know that there's a really important vote coming up on Saturday, the 14th of October. And in that referendum, there is only one thing people are being asked to do: to write yes or to write no. There's no maybe, there's no can I think about it later. For those of you who understand the voting system in normal elections, there's no numbers or counting or putting your preferences forward. It is simply a yes or a no. And because of that, so many people really want to know how they can talk about the issue and get some of their questions answered, which is why, as Peter mentioned, when we asked people to register for this, there was an opportunity for people to put forward their questions. And as we go through the discussion with the panel, and also when Rowan talks about the overall scene of the referendum and what the voice will do, we've really tried to make sure we can address each of those questions. Most of them, to be frank, were very similar to each other. There's obviously clear themes of which people are asking about, so we will touch on as many of those as we can. So we'll first hear from Rowan Nicholson, and then we're going to hear from a panel of people who are involved in the local community and also those involved on the national campaign for Yes. There's a table outside which allows for you to sign up and get some to get more involved. We are now at the end of this, really staring down the barrel of the last few weeks of this campaign. So if you can and are willing to help out and support the Yes campaign, we need people. The week after next, on the 3rd of October, pre-poll starts. We're going to need people standing on polling booths and helping to encourage people to vote yes. And if you can lend some of your time to the pre-poll booths, just as you would at election time, we know the campaign desperately needs support. So please stick around afterwards, pop your name down, and let us know how you can get involved and help more. I now want to introduce Dr Rowan Nicholson, who is going to give us an overview of the voice and how it operates, taking in consideration a lot of the questions that a number of you submitted. Rowan teaches and researches in international law and constitutional law at Flinders University. In the past, he's served as the co-director of the Sydney Centre for International Law and has worked on cases before the International Court of Justice about genocide and border disputes. He's very learned in these issues and areas. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to introduce Rowan today, because we went to university together and I don't think we've seen each other since. We look just as young and fresh as we did back then. I'm sure you'll agree, Rowan. We look forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'm here as a lawyer. My expertise is in more or less this area of law, constitutional law, and also international law. Law matters here because so much of this debate is about law, but there is so much misinformation about what the legal aspects of the voice are. I'm going to talk it through by showing you the entire text that it is proposed we add to our Constitution. It's only a few sentences, And I'm going to explain what each of those sentences does and why it's part of the referendum. Here's the first clause we propose to add. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Why add this to the Constitution? It's not necessary. The Australian Parliament could create the voice through ordinary legislation. Here in South Australia, our Parliament has created a state-level voice through ordinary legislation. But there is a difference when you add it to the Constitution. The difference is that it becomes permanent. We have had Indigenous representative bodies in Australia before, but historically one government has created them, another has abolished them, the next has recreated them, and yet again they have been abolished. Indigenous Australians have proposed permanence so that this becomes part of the political conversation in Australia, a continuing feature of our public life. Since we vote in a referendum as the Australian community, we are a higher authority than Parliament, and once this is in the Constitution, it will stay there. On the other hand, there is a risk to creating the voice through a referendum. It is hard. We have had 44 referendums in Australia and only 8 have succeeded. First, we need a majority of Australians overall. Second, we need a majority of Australians in at least 4 of the 6 states. And as you all know, the polls are quite tight. Support among Indigenous Australians is extremely high. The polls tell us it is about 83%, but among Australians generally it is much closer. The second clause to be added to the Constitution. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. This is the sole function of the voice. That word, representations, essentially means advice. This body will advise Parliament and the government. Occasionally, we hear it said that the voice will be a kind of third chamber of Parliament. This is not a legally accurate analogy. Parliament makes laws. It changes laws. It has a direct control over what Australian law says. The voice will have no direct control. It will give advice, and Parliament or the government may or may not take that advice. If they dislike it, they can ignore it. Sometimes it is said this will result in litigation. There will be nothing to litigate because the voice has no power to change the law, only to advise. A more accurate legal analogy would be with something like the Law Reform Commission, the Productivity Commission, the Human Rights Commission. These are existing bodies whose function is to advise Parliament or the government. Sometimes their advice is followed and sometimes not. They improve the quality of decision-making by giving our leaders advice from a particular perspective. The Indigenous voice will be of the same kind. It will present a perspective that represents the views of the majority of Indigenous Australians and that improves the quality of government decision-making, but without fundamentally changing how those decisions are made. Another suggestion we sometimes hear is that the voice will create racial division. It is not about race as such. Race is not a legal concept. It is about indigeneity. Indigeneity is a legal concept, and it is not quite the same thing. In international law, the core meaning of an Indigenous people is a people who have been dispossessed by settler colonialism, the original people of a place who have been displaced and dispossessed. Indigenous Australians, the Maori people in New Zealand, the various original peoples of North and South America. That is a distinct legal status. It gives rise to certain legal consequences. So, for example, in Australia we have a number of laws, programs and policies that only relate to Indigenous people. Since they were the only people here before 1788, They are the only people with property rights that derive from a pre-colonial system. We have particular laws to protect Indigenous culture and heritage. The logic of international law, which this seeks to implement, is that if you are affected by special laws or policies or programs, you should have a special say. That is the logic of the voice. There is no other cultural group in Australia about whom we make special laws. We only make them about Indigenous Australians. So this logic only makes sense for this particular group. So far from creating division, this implements into Australian law an international legal right of Indigenous peoples and achieves a kind of equality by giving those affected by laws and policies and programs a say in how they are made. The third and last clause that is proposed to be added. The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. Now, I have now read out to you the entire text, all the words that if this referendum succeeds will be added to the Constitution. This is it. The point of this clause is to enable Parliament to fill in the details. And sometimes we are asked, why aren't we voting on those details now? Why not put all the minutiae into the Constitution? How the elections will be held, on what date, who will vote, on what particular occasions the advice will be given. Well, this follows the ordinary pattern of the Constitution, the ordinary division of labour. Our Constitution is a place for broad principles that we agree on as a community. It is for Parliament to fill in the details. Let's take, for example, what the Constitution says about democracy. It says virtually nothing. It says Parliament shall be directly chosen by the people. It does not say who can vote. It does not tell us anything about the voting system. All those details are set out by Parliament in our electoral legislation. And there is an advantage in that. We can tweak them. We can experiment, we can adapt. And as you might know, we change our electoral legislation quite frequently to affect things like changes in technology, changes in our conception of what democracy looks like, changes in our habits as a society. That allows for flexibility. So it will be for the voice. We are deciding on the general principle, Parliament will then fill in the details. If we want to get a general idea of what Parliament will do, we can. The government has issued reports. We have already the detail for the South Australian voice, which says, for example, that it will have 12 members drawn from all regions of the state. We can find some indication of what the detail will look like, but it will be for Parliament to decide, and Parliament will be able to change it in future. Now that brings me to the end here. If any further legal questions or issues arise, I'm sticking around. I'm happy to answer them, but I might hand back to you, Sarah, to continue.
Thank you so much, Rowan. That was a great explanation of the question that we're being asked to vote on, but also a lot of the questions that people have submitted in terms of the registration process for this forum. And a lot of the questions you hear being asked as this issue is being debated, so thank you for that. One of the analogies I was thinking of when you were speaking was, we're being asked to vote yes or no to the idea of recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in our Constitution, and to the idea that in recognising them, that we give them an opportunity to have a say over the issues that impact their lives, and that's through the voice. And I was thinking, if I wanted to invite somebody to breakfast, I would say, I'd pick up the phone and I'd call you, Sally or Rowan, and I'd say, hey, Sal, would you like to go to breakfast? How about breakfast on Sunday morning? And you would think about it. Are you free? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you want to spend time with me? But I don't think you'd be saying, well, what's on the menu? And how much is it going to cost? And exactly what table are we going to be sitting at? And what type of water is going to be ordered? And how long exactly is this going to last? And how long is it going to take for the food to get on the table? And if you did, I'm not sure I'd be asking you to lunch or breakfast. Look, I think it is important that we understand the process of this. It is actually a simple but very elegant proposition. And First Nations people have been asking us as a community for a long time for recognition in the Constitution and for a change for the way governments write policies that impact their lives. And, you know, somebody who's been in politics now for a number of years, it's quite clear to me that the status quo is not working, that the state of health of Indigenous people is so much poorer than non-Indigenous people on average, and those statistics are horrifying. The state of the care and the education levels of Indigenous children in particular. And we know that the status quo isn't working, so we need to find another way. And when I think about why I'm voting for the Voice and why I'm passionate about making sure this referendum passes, it's because I don't want it to keep going on something that's not working. It's time for change, and it's time to give First Nations people the recognition and the opportunity to have a say over the issues that affect their lives. And in saying that, I want to invite our panel up for a further discussion. So if I could please welcome Bruce Marriott, Sally Scales, Anne Barkaway, and Muzafar Ali. And I'll just quickly, for those of you who, introduce each of our panellists so that you have a little bit more of a sense of who they are and where they come from. Sally Scales, many of you would know, is an amazing South Australian artist. Sally comes from the far west areas in the APY lands, but you spend most of your time in Adelaide these days, don't you, Sal? Yeah. Sally has been involved in the Uluru Dialogue for a number of years, is part of the leadership group there, was as part of the conference where the Uluru Statement was written. So you've had quite a long journey with this. And you're also a foster mum to little Walter, who is a gorgeous young boy. And you may have seen his photo around because he's doing lots campaigning for the Voice as well. So thank you, Sally. It's wonderful to have you here. Bruce Marriott. Bruce is representing the Blackwood Uniting Church. Thank you, Bruce, and your community for hosting this forum today. It's wonderful to see the community being able to come together in this way. Bruce, you've had a long professional working life as an ordained minister of religion, a teacher, public servant, both in state and federal government. But you also spent 5 years in Alice Springs as manager of community services, and in that time, I'm sure, gained an extraordinary insight and first-hand knowledge about what is and what isn't working in relation to helping the disadvantage facing our Indigenous Australians. Anne Barkaway is here representing the Blackwood Reconciliation Group. Anne is a social worker who migrated from the UK as a young adult, but you've lived in the area for 40 years, so you are definitely a local. And it's wonderful to see the local reconciliation community and group getting involved in this campaign. Muzafar Ali is a wonderful artist and storyteller in his own right, a former Hazara refugee from Afghanistan. Back there, of course, you worked as a political analyst, and you've got some interesting insights into the way politics can unfold in probably some of the most ugliest ways. But you've done a lot for helping particularly the education of children, refugee children in Indonesia and in Thailand. Muzafar won the Fred Hollows Humanitarian of the Year Award last year. He's also produced a number of documentaries and has established the Hazaras for Yes, which is a group that is working to encourage those who, from various multicultural community groups, to get behind this Yes campaign. So really keen to hear your insights into all of this as well. So thank you all. Let's give our panel another warm welcome. And I might just start with a opening question around why you're involved in this campaign, what the voice means to you, and why you're voting yes. And we might start, maybe we'll start with Bruce.
First of all, the first thing I want to say is something I'm not. I'm not a member of any political party. What I am is a representative of Blackwood Uniting Church, very conscious of the fact that when you represent a congregation such as Blackwood Uniting, that there may be some people who want to vote no. But I'm also aware that representing the Uniting Church, that within the Uniting Church there is an organisation known as the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Christian Congress. Thank you for the correct title. And they, of course, will very strongly support a yes vote. So on their behalf, I'm more than happy to do so. My background and my reason for voting yes is quite clear. I have been involved with Aboriginal people since I was 8 years old. My experiences have varied greatly, and the 3 years in Alice Springs have convinced me that this needs to happen. I'm the older statesman here today. I'm 87 years old. This will be my last referendum. Our Constitution has a huge hole in it. It doesn't even mention anywhere the word Aboriginal or Torres Strait Island people. That hole needs to be filled. It needs an acknowledgement. I see this as my last opportunity to correct something that I see as wrong. I hope you'll join with me in doing the same.
Thank you, Bruce. I might go to Sally. You've obviously been so involved on the front line for getting the voice to this point. You've been in negotiations with government, with your community. You're an official spokesperson for the Uluru Statement, the Uluru Dialogue. Tell us what really drives you.
So for me, I had no clue about the Constitution until I went to the regional dialogues. And they came out of the Tony Abbott, Julia Gillard, that tic-tac-toe who is Prime Minister, that era of leadership. So they, people would remember there was that recognised movement. We need to recognise Aboriginal people. And Aboriginal people weren't supportive of that because it was about symbolism. It was just about, let's just recognise you guys. And the Referendum Council actually went back to Abbott at that stage and said we need to actually do something better and more substantial. And I got this invitation to go to this dialogue at Ross River, which is 2 hours out of Alice Springs. And I was like, what is this? Like, what is this meeting? And the Central Land Council had invited me, and I went along, and it was incredible to sit and learn about our civics and learn about this Constitution and the race clause we have now, Section 26. what was on the table and the symbolic sort of recognition, and straight away these community members said, no, we don't want that. The biggest driver out of all of this, and this is in the Northern Territory where we've had the intervention, and there were so many community members sitting there talking about, people talk about the intervention, but they don't actually talk about the loss of community organisations and community councils and community voices at that day-to-day level of that community input into what's going on in our communities. And that was the bigger driver for me, because I'm from a remote community. I moved down to Adelaide a couple of years ago because of this work. But I'm a bush kid. I've seen the failures of government time and time and time again. I use an example, I don't know where she is nowadays, but this is from 14 years ago. A Labor minister, an Aboriginal Affairs Labor minister, when my community had said to her, we want to subsidise the cost of freight to our remote communities. Because at that stage we were paying $14 for an iceberg lettuce. For 2 tomatoes you're paying $8. For 20 pack of black and gold, not Huggies, black and gold nappies, you're buying it for $48. Instead of subsidising the cost of freight, she chose to build market gardens. Now, I'm from the desert, arid country, calcium, water, like there was no program with it. There was no ongoing costs for it. Like, it wasn't going to work, and she was told by everyone, this is not going to work. We want to subsidise the cost of freight. She chose to do market gardens. So that's one example from 14 years ago. And we got the blame. She wasted almost $1 million of money. We got the blame. Oh, those Aboriginal people, they don't know what to do and how to look after their country. Look, again, we're wasting more money. We all hear those rhetorics. And so for me, this opportunity to be involved in this, where out at Uluru, this Aboriginal leadership, this incredible group of Aboriginal leaders said, A, we're not going to issue to the Parliament, we're not going to issue to the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, we're actually going to issue to all Australians. Because this is about changing this constitution, this document, this really old document that was done by a bunch of men on a ship off the coast of Sydney, didn't include women, didn't include Aboriginal people because they thought that we would die out by then. Think about that. Didn't include women and didn't include Aboriginal people at all. And they made the Constitution so difficult because they wanted to protect themselves, protect their assets. So that's why we have a double majority. And it's, and this, for me, why I'm voting yes is because there's two prongs to this. It's about our recognition as Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal people from this country, but it's also about our representation. So when there's laws and policies that ministers and senators make, we can actually sit there and go, hey, can you stop thinking like we're all the same communities? Or you're about to waste $1 million that no one cares for on a program that we know is not going to exist after 3 months. That's why I'm voting yes, because we're living in the no. We are currently living in the world of no. There's no opportunities, there is no future foresight for our kids. We're living in no proper health comes for our communities. We're living in a no opportunity space where there's a dictatorship to us rather than a journey of yes and together.
Thank you, Sally. And what drives you, and perhaps in that, thinking about the comments that both Bruce and Sally have made, the other members of the Blackwood Reconciliation Group?
Wow. Well, I can talk about myself and I can talk about the Blackwood Reconciliation Group. That's two things. What I wanted to say is when I arrived here in 1977, I didn't know anything at all about Aboriginal people. I knew they existed, but that was all. I came from England. And guess what? I came here so easily. I had so much privilege straight away. I wasn't even planning to stay. I was just travelling around the world. I had easy, free entry to this country because I was born in Britain. I got a pathway to permanent residence within months. I got work very easily. The privilege that I brought with me entered me into a very privileged section of this society. I was born in 1952, and I rapidly learned once I got here that an Aboriginal person who was born in 1952 wouldn't even have been classed as a citizen. They were likely to have been stolen from their family of origin. They were likely to have been forced to live on mission stations. There were limits on where they could go and what they could do. And as a social worker, and I've worked here as a social worker for over 40 years, I saw that imbalance of privilege playing out time and time again. So that's what motivates me as a person. I'll try and be brief. Blackwood Reconciliation Group. Do most of you know the Colebrook site in Blackwood? Does anybody not know the Colebrook site? So I don't need to talk about that.
I think it would be helpful if you did.
It would be? Okay. Well, as a local, I discovered the Colebrook site in the 90s, which is when Blackwood Reconciliation Group was forming and working with the Chidi Chuta, who are the people who were resident at Colebrook or their descendants. Should acknowledge that Bianca's grandmothers were both residents at Colebrook. If there's anybody else in the room who has that connection, I don't know, and I'm sorry that I don't. But I discovered it because my children were going there on a school excursion, so I didn't join the group at that stage because I was working full-time, but I went to various events there as the artworks were created, as the memorials were created, and kept in touch. And my good friend Di, who's over there, who I worked with 20 years ago, was involved. You've been involved for over a decade, haven't you? So when I retired, I wanted to get involved in something local, and I wanted to get involved with something that contributed to reconciliation, because I felt in my career I hadn't done as much of that as I would like to have done. So it is a memorial site to the stolen generation children, 350 children who grew up in this community, who were stolen from all over South Australia, and it's a beautiful place to visit if you haven't visited.
Thank you, Anne. Muzafar, where do you come from to this issue? I mean, I remember when I first spoke to you about this, you were talking about thinking about the privilege of being able to come to Australia, to migrate to Australia, to the welcome that you've been given. Can you unpack some of that for us?
Thank you. To be honest, I may be the newest person to come to Australia and sit here. I came to Australia just 7 years ago. But for me, the Australia today, or the time when I arrived in 2015, for me, this is the most beautiful place to live, where we tend to listen to each other. The most beautiful place, the impact that I see today in this moment, is that we are sitting here from different backgrounds, with beliefs, with different ethnic backgrounds or ideologies. It's such a good place where we can sit together and we can talk together. In this listening, we listen to each other, to our voice. For the first time in my time here, during this campaign that I do, first time I talk with our No supporters. Welcome. This is the beauty of Australia, where we welcome, we sit together, we talk to each other. And I think the best thing is we share our concerns. The best thing is that I think what connects us, that we share the same concern as a nation, that the government policies hasn't worked for the Aboriginal people. There is no doubt in it. There is one thing that brings us here. We are all concerned about our First Nations people. Whether we vote yes or we vote no. I vote yes. I campaign for yes, but we share the same concern. We want to change this. We want to be part of this. I see, as Bruce said, this might be his last referendum. This is my first referendum. And with a lot of the multicultural communities, this could be the first referendum. For me, why I became passionate about is the connection we have. I'm from Afghanistan. I'm from the Hazara community. More than 60% of the Hazara people got killed in Oruzgan during 1890s persecution. We were the majority and we were reduced to minority. My grandfather was enslaved, his siblings got killed, and his sister, we don't know what happened to her. Someone took her away. We know the same thing happened to our Aboriginal people. The time when I arrived as an artist, I remember in 2015 there was the art exhibition going, and immediately I went to see the art pieces. I was just amazing how these indigenous arts, how powerful they are. And I took selfies with some of those artists, and I realized that these people lived here for more than 60,000 years. And all of a sudden I found myself on this ancient land. And then I was sitting and taking photos and listening to their stories. And then I was thinking, what happened to these communities? They come from the remotest communities from Australia. What happens to them? That was such a different story that I could see in Adelaide, where I was resettled. It's a totally different story. So I studied Aboriginal culture in university, and I was more into learning about the First Nations people and their culture. So my second documentary, which is called Watandar, My Countrymen, investigate or delve into this connection, how we are connected in Australian society, in the fabrics of Australia. Of course, we are much more connected. That's the tagline of the film. The Watandar goes and meet, I'm the character where I find these descendants of the Afghan cameliers who came during 1860s to 1920s. Their descendants are still living here. They're with us. They're artists. They represent all walks of life. They could be in outback Australia. They could be living in the cities. And I find those connections. You know, I'm not new. I'm not irrelevant. Yes, we have these deep connections. We have this contribution in modern Australia to make it the modern Australia in terms of infrastructure, the communications. I feel proud of this connection. But the time when I went to those small towns like Lyndhurst, where up to 20 people live, and I find this one descendant of Afghan cameliers who is also Aboriginal, and he tells me that, am I Afghan camelier descendant? No. Am I Aboriginal? No. Because why? He was a stolen generation. He lost everything. And we sit on that table, we cry, because I can feel the pain. Yes, that happened to my grandfather. That happened to me. When I returned in Afghanistan in 2005, I couldn't go to Oruzgan, where my grandfather was taken away from his family, where he lost his lands, because the security was so bad. But I think why I get passionate, it's about, as you said, Senator Hanson Young, we have just two choices, yes or no. We have just two choices. There is no maybe, there is no preference. And what I see in my visits in remote communities, it's not just that I slept one night and walked in the morning, wake up in the morning, I say yes, but it's about the connections that I made. I discussed with my fellow old countrymen, the Watandars, I say, that they support this. They want a change in their life. Of course, I want to say to our no supporters, there are Aboriginal people, they say no. I met them, I talked to them. There are the Afghan camelier descendants who say no. I respect, but overwhelming majority of these communities, they say yes. They want a change in their life. As you said, Sally, yes, we live in the era of no. we are concerned of the staggering money you showed me. That is staggering money. It doesn't have any impact. $40 billion. We don't have impact. Why we don't see any impact? I think this is the time we come into this place and we can have a say. And I could go and quietly say yes in the ballot paper, but I decided to educate my community.
Thank
Educate
you.
my community to say we have this responsibility, we have this connection in Australia, and we can make the right decision, which is yes for me.
Thank you. We heard from Rowan and in his presentation the difference between why we are being asked to amend the Constitution, to acknowledge First Nations people, and to put in the Constitution the ability for Indigenous people to advise and give advice to government and parliaments. Sally, I might ask you first, why do you think it's important that we have a constitutional voice and not just the parliament decide to give Aboriginal people a voice through just a legislation?
The biggest thing is because the legislation can be written away. In one afternoon, it can be done away with. And that means all the programs and policies and the ways that the structures have been can be dealt away with. We saw this with ATSIC. ATSIC was running not just, it was running with regional and remote voices feeding up and feeding down. So you had that grassroots movement. You had the information flowing and outcomes were great. Like you had community representation, and then they got away with that. And, you know, they have this hand-picked advisory board or group. No one really knows who's there, or they have NIAA and all this sort of stuff. But it's this, the amount of times that we, as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members and from regional, remote and urban communities, have had to fit our ways of thinking and structures and conform it into what the government of the day want us to. That's happened time and time again. And when we get used to that way, they get rid of it. Or better yet, they don't actually tell us. They don't tell us. They come to us and say, this is what we're doing now. You've got to do it like this now. And no traction can happen. Like I gave one example of stupid market gardens. That's one minister wanting to have her own ideas and policy. You know, the amount of times, like I think about the conversation around the Free the Flag with Harold Thomas and how nasty that got and how hard that got. Imagine if the voice was there, you know, because ATSIC used to be there and support Harold in what that looked like. And, you know, yes, it's now free for everyone to use Aboriginal flag on products and things, but there's those different structures that happen. But it's the thing that we look at so much is that it's that representation needs to be there, so it can't be done away with the next government or the whatever. So someone who has a whim of, no, let's get rid of it, that's not working, you know. Because Aboriginal people, we constantly have to audition. We always have to show up and put our best foot forward. You know, Pat Anderson talks about that every time there's a new government, and it might be the same government gets voted in, it's a new government because they like to rejig who's the minister for whatever, and, you know, the executive government underneath is having a little shift around. So we have to go and reintroduce ourselves and talk about why our program needs funding and why it's successful. You know, and sometimes that we're not in the room, we're not invited in. You know, sometimes, you know, I think about that intervention. So many so many programs came to Central Australia. I was living there. I would grow up in Alice Springs. So many programs came there. And I mean this no disrespect for the space that we're in. But I call it the Care Bears. There was the Wesley Care, Uniting Care, Anglicare, Relationships Australia. All these different programs all came there to do all of these programs around youth and youth justice. And you know what happened? The Aboriginal organisations that were there, they got suffered. Their voices got snuffed out. Because all of these organisations were going for the same pool of money. The Aboriginal run and organisations that had been there for a long time, that were doing a great job, who were working with communities, which were working with families, were starved out of that opportunity. So that money never hit those Aboriginal communities. Those kids fell through the cracks. And we talk about, one of the biggest policies that the Greens have gotten around with the housing stuff. I say welcome to the housing crisis. Because Aboriginal people have been talking about housing crisis for a long time. We have families and families and families, 4 generations that live in one household. We have tuberculosis in the APY lands at the moment. That's a preventative disease. We have calcium-filled water. We had a certain senator say that colonisation was good for us because we now have running water. Well, there's Aboriginal communities that have poisoned water, that have uranium water, that have gas water. Yarrabah community outside of Cairns has to go and fill up water tanks in Cairns and drive it back because there's too much iron in their water. All of these things we wouldn't be okay with our communities having. I used to sit on the board of the APY Council, and we had SA Water come in, and they were like, the calcium levels are on the margins. It's on the margins. They're okay. It's on the margins. I was like, on the margins of what? And they were like, oh, look, if it was a little bit higher, then it will be a problem. I was like, so it's literally on the margins of being okay. And I literally asked him, so if that was Burnwood Council, if you were advising that, would that be okay for them? He was like, no. I was like, so why is it okay for my communities? He had no answer. That was SA Water telling me my communities are okay with this particular type that's not okay for anyone else. And you think about how many programs, how many stuff that is going on, and that's the level of care that we're getting on the margins, on the fringes of okay. Not the best, not what everyone else is entitled to, not what everyone else has got the right to, but just the okay bit. And so I look at that and go, that's why we need it in that we need it in the Constitution, because with the legislative stuff, they can get rid of it. They can get rid of it. They've shown us decades and decades and decades ago. And also this founding document, this document that's 122 years old, written by 9 white men on a boat, that didn't include women, that didn't include, we're scared of the Chinese, didn't want to include Aboriginal people because we were going to be dead by then, didn't want to recognise us, and didn't want to have any representation by us. That's what we're talking about, a 122-year-old document. Now, are we really reflecting on the past 122 years and saying, yeah, that's the same Australia? We're okay with it staying in this status quo. Like the last successful referendum was in 1977. And you know what that was for? Does anyone know? Except you're a lawyer. A term limit for High Court judges. And you know, in the section about the High Court judges, they say judges are he. But like, that is why this is, like, it is such a small, like, this document, that is why we need to be included. It's about representation, but it's also about our recognition. It's about unifying this country. It's about us coming together for a better Australia.
Thank you, Sally. Anne, I want to ask you, did you go to the Yes Walk in Adelaide last weekend? What was that like? I went to the Sydney one, I wasn't at the Adelaide one, so genuinely interested. But what was it like to be surrounded by so many South Australians who are hearing these arguments and are seizing this opportunity for change?
That is a great question. It was one of the most uplifting experiences I've ever had, I think, because there were so many more people there than anybody had expected. I've heard quotes of about 10,000 people. I think they were expecting 2,000 or 3,000. So people had turned up who hadn't registered. And it was exhilarating to be with so many people and to see, and you bumped into people that you know that you didn't know were going, people that you hadn't seen for a few years. And to do that walk with everybody chanting and singing together was just very, very uplifting.
When I was walking in the Sydney march, it struck me that there's this desperation for the country to be united, a desperation for us to put behind us, and Bruce, you spoke of this, and the wrongs of the past, and move forward together. When I was looking around at the crowd in Sydney, I was thinking, this is an extraordinarily diverse section of the community.
That's true. Younger
people, older people, from all walks of life. But it was I felt inspired as well. And what it showed me that if we can get all of those people out on referendum day, and if you were at that walk here in Adelaide, we need you to put your hand up and help on polling booths. We need you to be there on the day wearing your T-shirts and saying, I'm just a local member of my community and I'm doing the one thing I can. Bruce, I'd like to go to you. You mentioned that this will be your last referendum.
We don't know that.
Well, we don't know. You don't know that yet. But you suspect. How have you been talking about this issue with your friends and your family and people in your community?
I've been approaching it as a very practical thing. To look at the words themselves that are proposed, I can't find any threat there to the sovereignty of Parliament, for example. There is nothing to fear. And I am concerned and talk to my family and friends about the fears that are being raised by people who say no. Fear is a very powerful weapon. If you want to maintain the status quo, use fear. It will always work. So I talk more in positive terms about what it might achieve. I think to have a voice enshrined in the Constitution is an absolute first step. I want to say it's not new. Let me introduce you to William Cooper. 1933, he started to gather a petition that was addressed to the King of England. And the petition basically said, we want a voice in Parliament for Aboriginal people. It's gone on since 1933. I was born in 1936, so it happened just before that time. I remember Sir Doug Nicholls, he was Pastor Doug on this occasion, addressing a meeting in Melbourne that I attended in the late 1950s. And Doug was pleading with the government and with the people of Australia to do something about the desperate plight that he had discovered in his travelling across the country through the Warburton Ranges, for example, of what he said, we are doing to my people. Since 1970s, we've had 7 organisations that have advised the government. At least 7, there were probably others, and there have been individuals like Warren Mundine. And each one of them has disappeared. It has to be in the Constitution to avoid that happening again. How dare we deny their request of Aboriginal people that goes back 100 years at least, that is still with us, and all they are saying is, please consult us before you make decisions about our lives. It also follows the requirement of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. As far as possible, we should be giving to Aboriginal people the right to self-determination. This is a two-sided thing, the voice to Parliament. One side is that we have to listen. The other side is that Aboriginal people have to take responsibility. And I think we sometimes see it as a one-sided thing. Aboriginal people will do far better when they take responsibility and are given the opportunity, again, to take responsibility for their own lives and their own programs. And that's part of what The Voice is about.
Oh, thank you, Bruce. Very well said.
Sarah, can I expand?
And you look like you're going to read something to us there.
If possible.
Yes, please.
Because Bruce has got a book. This is a history book that I discovered from a local person in Blackwood that was written in 1932 as the story of Australia's history and was used as the main text in high schools until the late 50s, I think. And I'm just picking up on what Bruce said about fear, because this historian describes in detail the murders of Aboriginal people by the settlers, and also describes the deliberate poisoning of food in order to reduce the Aboriginal population. And his analysis, he says, he was talking about Queensland in this chapter, but as in Tasmania, the root of the trouble was fear. The early settlers and sheepmen, thinly spread over vast areas and frightened for the safety of their wives and children, were too easily provoked into shooting the natives. And I apologise about the language, because it's using inappropriate language, but it says the blacks, naturally angry at being driven from their old hunting grounds, were ready to take vengeance. Perhaps the Queensland blacks would not have responded to Sturt's gentler method of treatment, but we have to confess, it was never tried. The blacks were met by organised hunting and shooting parties of whites, and worse still, there are fiendish stories of poisoned food being offered to the natives under the cloak of friendship. And this next phrase is important. Not until the whites were settled in such numbers as to make their eventual conquest certain did their hostility to the blacks diminished. By that time, the fear had vanished. As the result of protests by humane people in Brisbane and elsewhere, the killing off policy was abandoned, and the last days of the dying race are being passed in a better atmosphere of mercy and succour from their white brethren. That was 1932, nearly 100 years ago. So to pick up on what Sally was saying, the Constitution was built on a very, very fear-driven and sick foundation, and I think that continues to permeate our society.
And thank you, Anne. In reflecting on those descriptions and the point that Bruce is making about fear and the use of fear we know in political campaigns I've been involved in a lot of political campaigns over my time in politics. Fear is an easy way. It's a shortcut way. Don't discuss the details. Don't listen to the arguments. Don't mount your own arguments. but just use fear. And we've seen that. It's not just in Australian politics. We've seen that around the world. Muzafar, reflecting on what Anne has just written, how do you speak to people in your community and in those groups that you're working with in terms of the multicultural communities in South Australia to deal with those questions of fear and say, this is nothing to be fearful of. This is actually a step towards uniting our nation and putting behind us the terrible things that have been done in the past?
What I really, as a newcomer in Australia and a new citizen in Australia, I would say that Australia is not complete without fairness. And the fairness doesn't come unless our Aboriginal communities do not get the agency to be where they want to be. And this referendum is all about that, giving agency and the voice. My communities know this because we have been subject to fear. We have been subject to propaganda, being refugees or migrants in Australia. We were branded as both people. We were called others. Whereas, we are taxpayers in Australia. We run the economy. We are part of this big machine to run Australia as a prosperous country. But being on the other side, being branded as Muslims and terrorists, we have faced this. Like I say this as a Muslim, even though I'm not a very good Muslim, but we become the victims. My daughter was facing this in the school, on the streets, and being this part of the side is very difficult to cope with that situation. And there are two ways to respond. Yes, being aggressive. We as human beings, of course we have emotions. But I think the best way is to respond is love. That's the universal language. This is what Uluru Statement is all about. Listen to us. This is why we are here to listen. And our indigenous communities want to be heard, want to take part in this listening process. This is where we listen to each other here. For me to talk with my communities and going through these side of this story, being as victim of fear, it's very easy to talk to them. And I haven't seen one single Hazara in my community who would oppose the referendum. They all of them say, yes, we will vote yes. And they know what is happening to our Aboriginal brothers and sisters in Australia. And I think they know that this is the opportunity that they can vote yes, and they can be proud of this, because they think it's a way that we live in this Aboriginal land, and it's not just being tokenism and say we acknowledge we are living on the Aboriginal land, but when we get the opportunity to vote yes and no, and then we refrain with no, I think this is where, yes, we want to be practically part of this. This is an acknowledgement. This is a contribution. We did some campaigns all over Australia, in Queensland, in South Australia, in Victoria, in Perth, and the Canberra. The response from multicultural communities have been amazing, particularly the Hazaras. We went to the shops, so some of our shopkeepers, they just took away their brochures from their business brochures and put the yes referendum brochures on this to replace it, because they thought, yes, I will be proud to be part of this whole campaign. Because we know the pain, actually. We know, I really wish as a refugee, I really wish as a Hazara person from Afghanistan, we had the same opportunity in Afghanistan to have our voice in constitution, to have this beautiful democracy where we could have referendums, to listen to each other. We didn't have that. But in Australia, we do have this beautiful system where we can campaign, we can listen to each other. And I think my job is the easiest job in all these communities. I go and everyone welcomes, and they probably just put this yes campaign posters in their shop.
Thank you. I want to ask each of you now what you want Sunday the 15th of October to look like, the day after the referendum. If we can have you reflect a little bit on the things that you've said, the hope that you have for what this referendum would deliver, why it's important. Bruce, would you be able to start us off? Yeah.
Oh gosh, I hope I wake up with a big thrill that yes has been successful. I think we've got to see this as a golden opportunity, an opportunity to establish something that will really, while it is very significant, is really a very conservative change. But a change that is so significant because it means that we acknowledge that people were here for 60-odd thousand years before any of my ancestors arrived. The fact that we now recognise that the gap that has occurred as a result of that settlement that came later, that gap can be closed, and it will be closed more readily by listening to Aboriginal people themselves. I truly believe that. When I was working in Alice Springs quite a few years ago, I was excited about some of the programs that the Aboriginal women had started. Some of them were saying, we're fed up with the alcohol abuse, we're fed up with the domestic abuse, we're fed up with all of these things that are happening, and they started programs that reinforced Aboriginal culture. And out of those, they were some of the most successful programs that we saw develop in Alice Springs. They started them without any support whatsoever. They eventually got some government support. It's reinforcement to me of the fact that when we listen and when we respond, I want to talk just for a second about listening. Some people have said that we need to vote no because this will be a divisive thing. I have never listened carefully to what another person is saying and walked away afterwards and felt more divided than I did united with them. And that's what we're talking about. This is not divisive. It will bring us closer together, and I would rejoice at that, as I hope you all would.
Thank you. Anne, what do you want Sunday the 15th to look like for you?
One of the things I learned fairly early on in my journey in Australia, as I got to know Aboriginal people, was how loving and generous and how extraordinarily resilient they are. And I was overawed by that because I'm not sure that I would be as resilient as a person, given what I know Aboriginal people have been through. So what I want Sunday the 15th to look like is an absolute celebration and acknowledgement and validation of that resilience and beauty and culture and the triumph of love over fear, the first step of the triumph of love over fear.
Wonderful. Muzafar, you've talked about love. What do you want Sunday the 15th to look like?
The Sunday, first, if I want to wake up and to see on the screens that Australia said yes. And this will give me a belief that, yeah, we are a great nation. We care about each other, we listen to each other, and we reject fear. We are a progressive nation. And, I would say this whole voice is something, such a humble ask, such a humble and modest idea that came from our First Nations people. It's not an iPhone. Even iPhone, Apple keep updating this, and a lot of people want this voice to be like an iPhone. They need more details. This is not an iPhone. This is just an idea of having a voice and being able to give advice to the government. And then on that Sunday, I really want to wake up and be proud and say, yes, we got this idea, and now it's up to our First Nations people to come up and grasp this as an opportunity, and our politicians like you to move forward from there. So as Australians, we will do our part. We will play our role.
Thank you. So we'll be on notice. Sally, you must have thought about this a lot.
Yes and no. It's like what Mufasa and Bruce had said, that opportunity for me so hopefully Anthony Green has told us that it's a yes on the Saturday night, that, you know, we're somewhere having a party, and then I wake up at 12 o'clock on the Sunday, not at 7 o'clock or 6:30 when my son's going, Mom! But for me, that's when our job starts. Whatever happens on October the 15th, this is it going to change what Australia will look like. If it's a no, it will be the most devastating blow to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. It will be devastating for the chance to right the wrongs that are in the policies and the programs in government. Because not every Aboriginal person wants to be a senator or a politician, and you know we often hear this thing about, oh, but you got 11 First Nations ministers. Yeah, but they're representing their party. They're a blue voice, they're a red voice, there is not a teal voice, there is a green voice, but that's not a black voice. So they're there representing their constituencies, their party lines, and we want that opportunity for us to be there with what's going on in our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. You know, those issues around, Aboriginal people get so much money. Yeah, but that doesn't actually hit the floor. It doesn't hit the ground. Well, that's why we want to fix it. It gets stuck. So that's what we want. So that's what we need to change. That's the conversation. It is getting in that space and saying those programs, and yes, it is. Our voices in there is going to say what we're doing, what is going on currently is not working. What is currently going on is not working. The closing the gap, we see those schemes, we see those numbers, we see that failure. What I want is my Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to be at that forefront, to be leading those conversations, to actually being heard in those conversations, being a part of the solutions, because we know the solutions. We know the solutions. Like that minister 14 years ago, everyone told her it's not gonna work. A market garden in a desert is not gonna work, and she didn't listen. That's one example, as I said, one example from 14 years ago. But on that October 15th, on that Sunday, we're going to wake up to a different Australia, whichever way it is. Hopefully it's a yes, and we're going to have a lot of work to do, because it's giving my communities the best opportunity to lean in and lean hard and get going.
Thank you, Sally. I want to thank our amazing panel, Bruce Marriott, Sally Scales, Anne Barkaway, and Muzafar Ali, and of course Rowan Nicholson for the presentation and answering all those pesky questions right at the beginning. Outside there is a table with information to sign up, to get more information, to find out how you can get involved. As I've said numerous times this afternoon, the real task now is to make sure we get people writing yes on that ballot paper. on the day of the referendum and in pre-poll. So if you can help out at the pre-poll booths, please do. We need all the help we can get to make this reality, to allow the country to move forward, to show hope and to have love conquer fear. Thank you very much, everyone.